Hello. Today we will analyze bishop g5 move, Rauzer variation, the main move. I would say best by test, the most popular definitely in this move in this position. And frankly, it's not easy for black to equalize here. But there are some lines which are still definitely playable and positions are not so clear. All in all, I would say in general, white is a bit better in every line, in my opinion. That's maybe one of the reasons why Rauzer variation is not that popular with black, even though lately it started to get some attention of top players. But the position is definitely playable and still quite complicated. But as white, I would definitely recommend you to play bishop g5. It's also my repertoire when I play e4. I mean, I used to play e4. I was going for bishop g5. And let's try to check variations one by one, and I will let you know what is the current state of theory. I will give you some very interesting novelties, some new directions with some analysis as well. And I will let you know what I think can be played with black and which lines I wouldn't recommend you. So let's check one from the worst to the best as usual. Queen b6. It's not working. Here it's simply not working because of bishop e3. If you checked my previous lesson on different moves in bishop g5, one of it was bishop c4, and actually bishop c4, queen b6 was the main move because with a bishop on c4, strangely enough, bishop e3 is not working, so black is just better. But with bishop on f1, it's a killer, it simply refutes queen b6, which is strange because usually, if you have a developed piece, but here it's just tactically because with a bishop on c4, queen takes b2 is possible. Knight db5, well, threatening to trap the queen. And now if queen b4, well, as you understand, with the bishop on c4, the bishop is hanging. So the bishop has to retreat to d3, and then black has time to defend against queen a5, against knight c7 check by playing queen a5, and he is probably simply better. But with bishop on f1, after queen b4, simply bishop d2 and followed by, if in case of queen a5, knight d5, and it's just winning for white. So then bishop e3, if knight g4, also again it doesn't work tactically because after knight d5 takes on e3 takes, queen d8, or if queen a5 check b4, everything is just by tempi, queen d8, knight b5, and well, black starts to lose material here. So queen b6, bishop e3, there is nothing better than probably just to remove the queen somewhere to d8 and admit that the opening didn't go well. You are just tempi down in this theoretical position, but well, that's why I would not recommend you, let's put it mildly, to play queen b6. Then what else? There is a queen a5 move. I think it's not sound. Sometimes, very rarely, people play this move. Maybe more. It's maybe a good move for bullet chess 1 minute because maybe your opponent already prepares queen d2 as a pre-move, and then you can take on d4 and very nice. Maybe still lose the game because it's only bullet 1 minute, but seriously, it's after bishop b5, I think it's just better for white. Bishop d7 has to be played, and now simple knight b3. So, well, the problem of black is that if he goes to b6 somewhere or c7, then white also has additionally, can take on f6 and has also knight d5, quite unpleasant idea. So white is just better here. And in case of queen d8, it's not quite clear why black lost all these tempis. It's okay to lose one tempi, removing the knight from d4 to b3, but 2 tempis is a bit too much, I would say, already to my taste. And here white is better, taking on f6 and queen h5. It's a very good square for the queen when it gets there, very rarely in Rauzer because white quickly plays queen d2. But if like in this particular variation, white can get to h5 with a queen, it should be better for white, especially considering that black's queen was running back and forth before. But also very nice move is queen e2, simply preparing long castle, f4, e5, and I don't quite understand what is black doing moving his queen. So queen a5 is better for white. Lately, actually g6 move became relatively popular. There were quite some efforts of Daniil Dubov, who played it a number of times in rapid chess. And with quite a success, I would say. I never really, seriously studied this move, but I played, of course, a lot of Rauzer with black in the 90s. And because after bishop f6, e6, I just don't believe that with this structure, ruining your structure, and the d5 square is on the white's control, that you can really equalize. But things are not so easy. So you need to know how to play with white. Anyways, I wouldn't recommend you to play it with black, frankly. But for those of you who want to know what to do with white, at least I've checked before preparing this course, and I think I found a very, very forcing line, which leaves white with a very nice, pleasant endgame with some definitely winning chances. So I will just show it to you. I believe it's the most practical, at least, decision. Maybe there is something even better, but that's good enough, in my opinion, to feel that you are ready to face g6, and probably also to think twice about playing it with black. So bishop b5, bishop d7, queen d2, bishop g7, black has to develop, long castle, short castle, knight b3. The most direct way of playing. You just want to take on d6, so black is playing queen b6, or he can start with bishop e6 after queen takes d6. At least engines do not show anything better than playing anyway queen b6. So queen b6, queen d6, bishop e6, and now queen c5. And to me, it seems like a very forced line where, and at the end of this line, black is fighting for his life. Just trying to make a draw in a worse endgame. So I don't know what Daniil Dubov has in mind, or maybe he's just bluffing a little bit in this rapid chess, but I couldn't find anything which would be satisfactory for me as black if I would play it with black. So after queen c5, white wants knight d5, everything. So white is just pawn up. So at least black can get back the pawn, playing bishop h6 check, king b1, bishop takes b3. But this endgame after queen takes b6 is very unpleasant. After bishop c2, it's king takes c2, ab, rook d7. It's really bad. White has a big advantage. So at least better to take on a2 with check. But now knight takes a2, ab, and simply c3, for instance, or bishop c4. I think both moves gives white a very pleasant edge. Black is suffering. He will, have to fight for a draw here with all these weak pawns. And white bishop on c4, which is very strong. So d line, more activity for white. Nothing to be happy with black. So I believe this is a simple variation which questions this g6 move. So again, I also don't recommend it to you. Then of course there is a bishop d7 move. We will come back to it at the end of this lesson. But the main move obviously is e6. Of course, now queen d2 is the usual way of playing. But lately queen d3 started to be quite popular, actually. It's also quite dangerous move, but I analyzed it recently with good engines, and I think I found the best way for black how to play, and probably this is good enough to equalize. You cannot really be sure about equalizing in Rauzer because the positions are always complicated. But let's put it this way, to get a acceptable position which you want to get playing Rauzer, so complicated, sharp, and rather unclear position. So what is the idea of queen d3? As I understand, the main idea is that in case if black plays a6, then white wants to take on c6, long castle, and then put the queen on g3. Let's say bishop e7, queen g3. Now, as you have already seen in my previous lessons very often in Taimanov, in those variations, queen gets to g3, and this is a very interesting maneuver in some lines. In some it doesn't work, but in this type of position, it's the queen on g3 puts a lot of pressure on the d6 pawn, also on g7 pawn, so makes black worry or think twice about castling. So here engines like this position with white. I believe it still can be playable for black, but probably better to avoid it with black. Then black can of course also play bishop e7, but after long castle, short castle, then again, first of all, there is h4 move or f4. I have a feeling that it definitely not in white's favor to have queen on d3 and on d2, but I'm not sure black will really manage to make real use of it, yeah. And of course, he can always take on d4 and transpose to the lines which we are going to consider later here, but it's hard to say because the theory of this queen d3 move is not really very developed yet. So it's hard to say if black can gain anything or not playing bishop e7. So my advice to you would be bishop d7 move here. Actually, against queen d2, it simply doesn't work. After queen d2, bishop d7 is a big mistake because white simply plays knight b5 and, black cannot save the pawn on d6. But after queen d3, bishop d7, black's idea is knight db5 is the most challenging move. The idea is that after long castle, black wants to play a6, and we will, of course, analyze the system in detail with white's queen on d2. But here with the queen on d3, for sure, it's a better version for black, no doubt. So even if with a queen on d2, the system is probably the best for black in Rauzer and not so easy for white to get anything special. So with queen on d3, I guess it should be okay for black here, because for instance, all those variations with f3 are already probably not very dangerous. Queen on d3 is really misplaced. So probably white should try to go f4, and now black can choose among different variations which are there after queen d2, but in most of them, if not all, it's better for black to have the queen on d3. So let's say I would probably choose to play h6, bishop h4, and now bishop e7. Already, by the way, the variation g5, fg knight g4 is definitely better version than with the queen on d2 and might already be quite okay for black. But bishop e7 is also much better version than white probably has to play knight f3, and he definitely, I'm sure, would love to have queen on d2 instead of d3 in this position. So I believe this long castle a6 shouldn't worry you too much if you are playing black. But the main test is knight db5, and here black is saving the pawn by tactics because of the queen on d3 he has knight b4 move, and I believe it's good enough for equality. There were games, by the way, on quite top level. So now if queen d2, then simply a6. You cannot take on d6 obviously because then the c2 pawn is hanging. And also a3 doesn't work because after ab the rook is pinned on the a line, so of course it's just a blunder. And so white has nothing better than to take on f6 and come back on d4, but here black has a good version of this typical position, and after, let's say, h5 is definitely fine. I mean, if you are playing Rauzer with black, you definitely shouldn't worry about this position where white lost some tempis moving with a knight to b5, d4, queen d3, queen d2. Yeah, here black is okay. That's why the challenging move is queen d1, strangely enough. So the pawn is still hanging on d6, and after a6, a3 or bishop f6 first and then a3. Let's consider first a3. Here knight c2, queen c2, ab is perfectly okay for black, because after bishop takes f6 he can take with a queen. Because after gf6, bishop b5, this position I wouldn't be so happy with black, with this pawn structure. But queen f6, bishop takes b5, queen d8, then followed by bishop e7 simply, and I don't see why white should be any better here. And that was, by the way, played in the game Yesipenko Ivanchuk, I think 2018, and it ended in a eventless draw. So this seems to be pretty equal. And if you take on f6 first and a3, now black is just equalizing by force. A b takes on a1, queen a1, and d5. Now very important. Ed bishop b4, and finally the position seems to be to sterilize rather quickly, probably. I mean, lots of exchanges, and I think it's heading to a draw, the game. So that is, I believe, after queen d3, probably bishop d7 is black's best. But as a surprise weapon, you can have it in your repertoire, queen d3, especially against people who are playing a6 variation, because it's tempting just to play a6 here, and then knight c6. This might be very interesting for white. And with black, probably now you know that bishop d7 is perfectly playable, and you are ready to face queen d3. But of course, the main move here is queen d2 in Rauzer. So what are the options for black? Actually, not so many options. I cannot, it will be difficult to give all possible variations, of course, in this format. Again, in any of those lines which I'm giving you here when analyzing the full Sicilian, you can always, I guess, find a course or a book which would explain you in every detail and analyze almost every move here. But in general, I will just want to give you the most important, the most valuable information about each system and this one. So I will show you the most important lines at least, but I'm trying really to go through the whole spectrum in each variation and also in Rauzer. So more or less I will cover everything. Some things which I believe are more principled and more serious I cover. Of course, I spend more time. Some which are quite clear in the assessment, I do it quicker. But all in all, you will not have I will not miss, you can be sure, some very important variation in any of these lessons. So queen d2. Now, as I've mentioned already, bishop d7 simply doesn't work because of knight db5. Same goes with h6. Would be very nice to take this bishop, but the problem is that black cannot take with the queen now because knight db5 already, and simply queen d8 long castle, and the d6 pawn falls. So that's why after bishop f6, black has to take with a pawn, but this cannot be good. I mean, white is just playing long castle, f4, all this typical play. Well, it's in any case not easy, those positions, but here black just lost a clear tempi play in h6 because he will anyway have to put pawn on h5, and that is really too much to count on having a good position out of the opening. So h6 is, not really recommended. Then there is not a very big choice. Then the other logical moves are a6 and bishop e7. I think there is a queen b6 move here also. Well, first of all, white can take and play knight b3, and this type of position is slightly better for white. There are quite many games, actually. But also white can simply make long castle, and also black is trying to go to endgame because there is, nothing then doesn't make sense, the queen b6. And actually this endgame is pretty unpleasant for black. Because white just puts pawn on f3 and is much better developed, so queen b6 is also not a great move. Then a6 or bishop e7. So let's start with bishop e7, my favorite move in the 90s. I played a lot. Then I didn't really like it. There were too many problems, and I moved to a6, but I have good memories of bishop e7, won some nice games, and in general had very good results. Well, at that time it was easier because there were no engines, or they were just appearing, they were very weak. So basically, it was much more difficult to pose problems. So, and even objectively dubious variations you could play for much longer than nowadays, when just people will go, push the button, and next game you have a risk of just getting a bad position out of the opening. So bishop e7, it's definitely not refuted, this variation, but I think there are just too many problems that I honestly would recommend you to play it with black. So I don't like it with black, but I wouldn't. It's of course your choice. You can play it, but I don't recommend. And for white, for those of you who want to to know what to do against bishop e7, I want to offer you totally very fresh plan, which was not played too much yet on the top level and not on the top level. I believe it's very good. I mean, I cannot find how black can get a decent position after this. I mean, of course, it's not losing by force, but I think it's worse in every line. So I would go almost as far as saying that this to me looks like practically a refutation of bishop e7. So long castle. Now there are two move orders. I was playing with a short castle in 93, those years, long time ago. Then I was pretty much worried about knight b3 move, which is true, it's very dangerous move. I remember, even though I won a totally crazy game, quite memorable game against Vasily Ivanchuk in Monaco tournament 94, rapid chess, but I was lost at some point there. You can have a look at this game. It was pretty crazy position. So knight b3 is also a serious move, but the main line is f4 here. And there are different ways of playing for black, but the main kind of system is knight takes d4, queen takes d4, queen a5. That is what I played. Frankly, I was not too happy even at the beginning of 90s without engines. I was barely holding it. I had a feeling it shouldn't really fully work. I mean, it doesn't lose, of course, but I believe white has some advantage. Nowadays, with engines finding more and more problems, even the move like bishop e2, I don't know why, but seems to be a very, very serious and very difficult for black to equalize. The old main line was bishop c4, and now the idea is bishop d7, e5 takes, and bishop c6. With this trick, black is at least not losing immediately, actually not losing at all. Yeah. Bishop d2 is the main move, knight d7, knight d5, queen d8, knight e7, queen e7. So this is the position. I played it also myself. I remember, for instance, with Michael Adams in Moscow 94, was suffering, barely managed to draw, because even if it's very solid for black, but white has two bishops, and in general white is fighting for advantage. But it's not that much for white. I mean, still it's pretty passive, I would say, for black. And another line, e5. Even this very straightforward move, black will probably make a draw, but he needs to work for it. I mean, it's not so easy. d5, queen e5. This is, I think, was played against me by Nigel Short in one of the tournaments in the 90s. And takes, knight d5. This is forced. Take on e7, take on e7. I believe the best move here is bishop d3. And, black still has to be very, very precise and accurate to equalize here, because white has some initiative. The king is, close in the endgame to the king side, and wants at some point knight b5, knight d6. So not so easy, but probably black can manage. So all in all, also, it's not very prosperous line for black, but at least there is no clear refutation. And then after f4, there are also moves like h6, many small lines, but all of them I checked them all in the 90s, trying to make it work. I couldn't make work anything for equality. Okay, it was not bad, but always unpleasant finally. And that made me drop this bishop e7 variation. But at least here there is a lot of theory, and from the white side, you have to learn a lot of lines like bishop h4. By the way, h4 is also not so easy. It's an interesting move. But bishop h4, and now black has... I've played once queen b6, was quite a bad experiment against Peter Leka in Belgrade 95. I missed something in my preparation because he just took play d5, and this position, I realized how bad is it, and it's just bad, and I lost without a fight practically. So queen b6 is just bad. And then there are all sorts of moves. There is bishop d7 move. By the way, I think it was played by Boris Spassky, maybe even against Bobby Fischer in the match. But it doesn't equalize. You can check the theory if you want. I think knight f3 is the main move, if I remember well. And black is suffering here. Very dangerous position for black. Then there is e5 line. White is usually playing knight f5, and there is big steal theory goes on and on here, but black is also suffering, fighting for a draw. So nothing really convincing for black, but still I think that even simpler, I would say, if not better, because white also has a nice position after f4, but definitely simpler because you don't need to memorize all those variations, is h4 move. Yeah, I mean, I found this idea and actually realized that, that it's really difficult for black to find a decent response against h4. Here, or what is also good, that in the case if you take on d4 first, queen d4 castles, then you still h4, of course. Yeah, you can do the same. So that is nice that you play your h4, you don't bother, you don't look at what is your opponent move, what is he doing. So after h4, what black can do? He can take on d4. I mean, let's consider it via this move for the castle h4, and now, well, actually white just wants to play king b1, f3, etc., and just start his attack. So let's say if queen a5, king b1, rook d8 for instance, and now queen d2. Very unpleasant move because knight d5 starts to be a threat. So b6, at least protecting the queen, and let's say rook h3. Also, that is a very important resource which you have with white after h4, rook h3, and black's position is very dangerous. Yeah, you can easily get mated. Some rook g3 comes often, and it seems to me that white is just better here. Then what else? You can play bishop d7, also king b1. Here also it's a useful move because after h6 now you can always play bishop c1, and this is the best square for the bishop. It is very dangerous actually to play h6 for black, because now with this typical f3 g4 play is already with the pawn on h7, it's still far from mate. Here once I play g5 I already break through on the king side. So also I couldn't really find anything convincing for black, or let's say queen c7, just f3, continuing with g4. Actually black doesn't have so much counterplay in this position. After h4 the challenging move is h6, of course, because now the idea is that in case of bishop e3, black has knight g4, so black wants to take this bishop. Bishop d2 is possible, but looks a little bit strange, this square for the bishop. After h6, in fact, white simply has a direct move e5, which leads to a pleasant advantage in endgame. It's very sad for black, especially when you started playing with a Sicilian, not with some solid Caro-Kann or Petrov defense. And then finally you by force have to end up defending an inferior endgame. So after e5, I cannot recommend you. I don't know what is better or what is worse, to play d5 or hg5, because in both variations by force black has to defend an unpleasant endgame. So queen takes e5, queen b6, bishop e3. Now, fortunately for black, at least he has knight g4, otherwise things would be really bad. But bishop b6, knight e5, bishop c7, knight g4, bishop g3. Well, and black still has to finish his development. White has a big initiative, better developed d-line, and black is just worse. I think after f5, bishop e2, stopping f4, and okay, it's clear that black is just defending an inferior endgame. Or another inferior endgame, if you like, with black, then hg, then simply ed6. And in order not to get mated on the h line, it's better to exchange queens, takes everything, gh, rook h4, and also pretty obvious that Black is simply worse. White has a big initiative, very active rooks, development. So black is suffering here and fighting for a draw. So nothing really satisfactory after knight takes d4. And otherwise, well, white wants king b1. I mean, just maybe at some point take on c6, rook h3. Well, it's difficult to find moves even for black, I would say, some logical moves. So I think h6 is probably the critical test. With the same ideas, I mean, at least bishop takes h6 is not made here. And the same idea is trying to challenge the bishop in case of bishop e3, knight g4, because of course, if you manage to exchange this bishop for the knight, then of course situation will improve dramatically for black. But after h6, white has a tactical solution: knight takes c6, b takes c6, and e5. And this causes black a lot of problems. Because after hg, d, the same type of variation, but only that it's even worse structure for black, so white is clearly better. So after e5, you have nothing better than taking on e5, and bishop takes h6. Very important tactical tricks, which engines found quite recently. Here, yeah, let's say you can, gh of course leads to simply mating attack, queen takes h6, and now, yeah, you see h4, you have now rook h3 idea with rook g3, and it's pretty simply bad. In case of knight g4, it doesn't save because of queen h5. So, well, we have a bit of a sad choice whether to go to a playable endgame, but slightly worse because of the pawn structure. Let's say takes, rook d8, rook e1, bishop c5, f3, and well, it's maybe not huge advantage, but clear that white has a better structure and simply it's going to torture black for many moves trying to win this endgame. So not really something you probably like to have with black playing Sicilian and Rauzer variation. So knight d5 seemingly is a bit more complicated, but now rook h3, also very important move. Again, you want to play rook g3, gh is not possible, just you getting mated. So f5 is the best according to engines, and now bishop g5 is a very nice square for the bishop. Let's say rook b8, bishop c4, and actually because of the structure, and especially due to this very bad bishop on c8, we shouldn't also forget that black's king is potentially pretty weak. So at some point, white under some circumstances can get h5, h6. Bishop gets to b3, so white's king is safe. All in all, a quite unpleasant position for black. You can play it, it's not too bad, but to me it's clear that white is better here. So I think that h4 is just very good, and I don't see, not that I'm so happy with black after f4, but h4 is simple, and I think that is good enough reason to think twice playing this line with black, and I think you are fully ready to face it with white already after listening to my explanations. Therefore, the main move here definitely is a6, and after long castle, black has a choice of systems, but not as big choice as we thought in the 80s or 90s. So let's check one by one. So first of all, I think that the main system and the most popular nowadays system is bishop d7 here, and we will analyze it at last, because this is a most serious system. It's just that I will show it to you via this move order. I will explain you then what are the pluses and minuses of this move order, but we are going, don't worry, we are going to check it carefully. This variation, this is now the main, and I also believe that this is the most interesting line for black in Rauzer. But here, in this position, bishop d7, okay, is late. Otherwise, there are not so many moves. h6, yeah, this is my variation, which I've played for quite a number of times, and with success. I beat Vasily Ivanchuk, in Dos Hermanos 96, I believe. Also, there were some nice games, like quick victory against Robert Hübner from Dortmund. So played a lot, but then actually there are different ways, of course, for white. Bishop e3 is in fact also quite difficult to equalize with black. I played bishop e7. Now white has f4 play, like Kasparov played against me, among others. Then I personally, you know already that I like to put pawn on f3 actually, and then black is taken, playing b5, and yeah, many games I played here. I think probably it's somewhat better for white. Still, it's not easy to equalize with black. I remember already on the side of white, I won a rapid chess game in Leuven, I believe, one of the years, not very long time ago, against Vasily Ivanchuk in this line. But in fact, everything was more or less bearable before they found this system, which was totally new at that time, knight takes c6 move. And this, frankly, that made me stop playing this variation. So I will not tell you all the remaining theory, because I mean, all the moves bishop e3 and so on, because simply, I mean, here I believe white is just better, and I don't see any line where, you know, which can be prosperous for black. So I believe this is probably kind of refutation of this line, of this a6 h6 variation. d5 has to be played, and queen e3. And well, actually the same plan, as you already know. Queen sometimes go to g3, bishop e2, and white just wants to push pawns on the king side. Of course, he has a big development advantage. Let's say in case of bishop e7, white simply goes bishop e2, castles h4, and black's position is at minimum dangerous, if not just bad, because white simply threatening g4, g5. Already maybe bishop h6 is threatening, because rook gets to via h3 also. It seems to be, well, not playable for black. That's why bishop b4 is the main move here, and now bishop e2. a3, bishop a5, this is more or less playable for black. This is not too bad. But after bishop e3, bishop e2, well, the choice is pretty set for black. He has to castle probably, because queen a5 is not good, simply bishop e5. And well, now if you take on c3, take on a2, well, there are other different moves, but actually bishop d3 is just killing practically, according to engines, already given +2 here. Because after d, queen g3 is very important move, very strong move, and ed queen g7, and okay, finally engine finds some defend how not to lose on the spot, but black's position is bad at the end. So queen a5, bishop e5 is also not great. So then castles and e5, and okay, white's attack is very powerful. If knight d7, then queen g3. There were games here, for example, I think rapid chess, but still there was a game Van Hao Ivanchuk, I believe, let's say king h8. I think Ivanchuk played queen h3, king g8, rook d3, and you know, rook comes to g3. Vasily got mated rather quickly. So probably relatively best is queen c7. Well, with the idea in case of bishop takes h6, at least there is queen takes e5. But here white has many moves after queen c7. Also, even bishop h6, queen f5, queen e5, f4 is quite dangerous. I mean, I think it goes like this variation, queen g6, h4, and it's also very, very dangerous for black. But also, you can just play rook e1 and then somehow start slowly but surely to mate black, and this position seems to be pretty bad for black. That's why most of the time black plays knight h7. Well, of course, the knight is not fantastically placed on h7, but structurally, of course, black has a good structure. It's just that if he can manage to defend against direct mating attack, things might not be too bad. And actually, there is no clear mate here with a knight on h7, but then, of course, white can already play positionally, making use of this knight, which is out of the game for quite a while on h7. So I think the simplest is knight e4, and this is the most popular move. bishop e7, black plays, and now even a3 actually is quite good. So now king b1, for example. White just, well, plays positionally. He's knight up for the moment because a knight on h7 is out of play. And let's say bishop d7, knight c5. And he still has in mind, well, h4, g4, just the direct attack, and g5. So let's say the following variation, queen a5, knight d6, c5. And now you just start to attack. h4 would be g4. Those threats are not real threats on the b line, and white is already well, getting g5, and mate is coming soon. So this position, I think it's, well, more as the assessment of the agents, it's +1, so it's pretty bad for black. So I believe this system is just not playable. White is simply much better. Then bishop e7 is another move. Actually, this makes sense. I will explain you later why. But the main line goes like this, f4, and I also played this system. At some point it was pretty popular, knight takes d4 now. Queen takes d4 and b5. I played it even with Garry Kasparov and with Vishy Anand in classical chess, so not too bad system. But, well, still, after some time I dropped this as well. And then I believe after I just dropped the whole Rauzer because I got tired of problems in all those lines. So after b5, white has quite a big choice, of course. Quite interesting is to play like this. Bishop e2, bishop b7, bishop f3, but I think the best is bishop takes f6. Now you have to take with g-pawn in this position, because if you take with a bishop, if I remember correctly, e5 was just killing. D, queen a4, I think is just bad for black. So gf6, and now e5 was quite a serious move. Also, it was played by Vishy Anand against me in Vaikanze. I played d5. It's practically only move, and here there are some complications, but I think at the end of the day black is doing quite okay. I even got better in this game. So e5 maybe is not too bad for black. f5 is actually quite dangerous. Now black has to play queen c7. If queen a5, king b1, b4, knight e2, this position is not good. It's better for white. Let's say e5, queen d2, and then white is in time to blockade on d5 or going knight g3, knight h5. So this is better for white. So black was usually playing queen c7 here, and after bishop e2, queen c5. And well, at minimum what white has is actually taking on c5 and playing fe, which is also, well, black probably holds here, but I mean, most likely holds, but you need still to defend this endgame. I mean, it's not a forced draw. So fe6, okay, bishop e6 is just better for white because the d5 square is weak. So fe6, bishop h5 check, king f8, e5 is very dangerous, and after f5, g4. Well, the series still goes on, and I think finally black was, well, managed to more or less to hold this variation, but also, yeah, he's just fighting for a draw in this line. So f5 is unpleasant enough, but the worst was that when I tried to make it work with black, I just couldn't see what to do if white plays slowly, like king b1, queen c7. This is black's plan, queen c7, queen c5, and then f5, queen c5, and just going back, queen d2, let's say bishop b7, bishop d3. And I think this position is very, very unpleasant for black, because white wants just to attack the e6 pawn, very typical play. Then you probably go knight e2, fe, knight f4, attacking this pawn. Somehow black is not in time. I couldn't make it work to get castles d5. White was always quicker with his play on the queen side or in the center. So I think that, well, first of all, f5 is no fun, and also this position I really didn't disliked, and I remember that I dropped finally this variation because of this plan of white. So yeah, but the thing is that in case of f4, black actually can play bishop d7, And this will be, well, this is one of the main lines of a6 bishop d7 variation, but white already played f4, and I consider, for example, f3 system, as we will see now, is even more dangerous than f4. So at least you transpose to that a6 bishop d7 without f3. Okay, that's already something. So in this sense, a6 bishop e7 move further is quite interesting, or bishop e7 then a6. So what else? If f3 here, maybe taking in b5, this might be a bit better version than the positions we are going to study with you now, because in those positions black bishop is already on d7. So here it might be actually quite okay, because even with the bishop on d7, it was not too bad for black. So here, who knows, it might even be perfectly fine for black. So, and then the other question is that, of course, white can take on f6 now. And you cannot, taking back with the bishop is not good. In this version, there is not enough compensation for the pawn with this pawn structure. So black has to take gf and let's say f4. Well, these structures are very special, and you need also, if you want to play it with white or with black, you need, of course, certain experience. Well, why here white takes on f6 without h6, so basically immediately, and why in some positions before I was saying that they were okay, here I still believe white is a bit better, because bishop is on e7. If bishop, in general, it belongs to f8 here, because sometimes, well, black always one day goes h5 in this position, then sometimes bishop can get via h6, and it's at least not worse on f8 than on e7, because it's a bit passive on e7. So in a way that means that after bishop e7, bishop f6, gf, this structure is already quite interesting for white. With a bishop on f8, I wouldn't maybe go myself if black haven't played h6. I wouldn't maybe take on f6 too early. But anyway, yeah, you need actually yourself to play those positions to understand those small nuances. But it's not too bad for black, because he haven't played b5 yet, so he can safely make long castle. Still, bishop d7, king b1, takes, queen c7, probably f5, queen c5, queen d2. I think it's slightly better for white, but it's playable. You see the problem, black's problem, it's what to do with this pawn structure, yeah, because he cannot play e5, immediately knight d5 will come, of course. EF is always bad also because of the same reason, the d5 square. Then white is slowly preparing some pressure on this pawn, on those pawns. Bishops are not really going too far out, because this bishop on d7 on this diagonal should control the e6 pawn. So black is sort of slightly passive. So I would say how the game can proceed. Let's say long castle, bishop e2. Now white wants to put bishop on h5 to start attacking the pawn on f7, therefore maybe h5 should be played. And now white can maybe play h4. It's one idea, trying to fix this pawn. But normally bishop f3 is the way, and then followed by knight e2. Let's say king b8, maybe white plays knight e2 immediately, then he wants knight f4, h pawn is becoming a bit weak. ef, under some circumstances can work, but most often because of this, all these weak squares, white still get an advantage. Let's say even takes, and then knight gets to d5, for example. Also bishop starts to be very powerful, yeah. So, not clear how to equalize h4, let's say. Then sometimes white can get, first of all, knight on f4, but also bishop g4, and then asking what black wants to do with this e6 pawn. I'm just explaining you this very typical structure, how the game can proceed, but of course black is solid, and white has to watch out for all kind of d5, opening up the position, sometimes even by means of sacrificing the pawn, and then black color bishop can start to be active. But all in all, it's probably a bit better for white, but not too bad. Playable for black, that's for sure. So that's why this it's a possible move further, a6 bishop e7. Not that it's something very special, but at least. And then what else? I think there is nothing else than a6 bishop d7 system anymore. But this system we will spend most time because this system is very serious, and I still like white. But I admit that it's definitely playable with black also. So let us check bishop g5, bishop d7. Lately, quite a number of players who want to play the system bishop d7, e6, a6. I mean, a6, e6 to be more precise. They start with bishop d7, not with e6. Well, I guess it's about trying to avoid the sidelines, maybe the queen d3 sideline, which I mentioned, e6, queen d3, because after bishop d7, now queen d3, maybe there is an interesting move rook c8 already, and here long castle doesn't work so well. After queen a5, all of a sudden black is already at least equal, because white has to take on f6, gf6, because the point that knight b4 is threatening otherwise. And black is very fine here. So after rook c8, white can maybe try to play knight b3, but this usually, is not too dangerous. a6, castle c6, black also should be okay after knight b3. So maybe this is the idea. But all in all, as I've already mentioned, I believe e6, queen d3, bishop e7, bishop d7 is also fine for black. So, matter of taste, you can start with e6 or bishop d7. But first, let's check, of course, white's main move is queen d2. Let's check the other lines for black here. I don't think there is anything very prosperous other than a6, e6, but anyway, of course, as I mentioned already, e6 is knight b5 is just bad. Then black can take on d4 and play queen a5, but to start with f4 is actually, there is a lot of theory and it seems to be in white's favor, but also simply bishop d2, I find it the most simple for white. Rook c8, and now we can transpose playing f3 to the variation which I'm going to show you right now. Or maybe even better is to start to play bishop d3, because black will probably anyway get queen c5 sooner than later, and then we don't need really f3. So then already maybe better to start with rook c8. Again, f4 here is very serious move, but since I don't advise you to play it with black, this system, and for the white players, I like to make it simpler. So my plan was to play f3 with white myself when I prepared this line, and after takes queen a5, very interesting move h4 here, actually also quite pleasant for white. But at least bishop d2, a6. And now, black's next is queen c5, trying to change queens and, just defend slightly worse endgame. So white main move is g4, but maybe bishop d3 is also quite interesting, because, queen c5 takes, and now this plan, b4, rook c8, a4, and b5. Just using the fact that black is not developed yet, white can start very direct play on the queen side. I don't know if it's really enough for a serious advantage, but a bit unpleasant for black to face this plan. But also g4 is very nice, because now also in g4 the idea is as well that g6 is not possible because knight d5 and g5 also. So probably also this. So that's why after g4 black has nothing better than playing queen c5. And then this endgame is defendable for black, but it's clearly unpleasant. I mean, black is on the defensive, bishop g7, and then there is this maneuver, which is quite nice, also slightly better for white, clearly. Black hasn't equalized. Also, maybe king b1, just healthy move, and bishop e6, for instance, knight e2 idea, trying to drive the knight somewhere to d4 or f4. At some point, well, white wants to start to push h5. So all in all, well, not very pleasant for black. So this is not very often played, because I don't even mention that f4 is also very dangerous. So maybe h6 is playable somehow here. Takes. I mean, the idea is that black is trying to avoid playing e6 here. So it's not great, but white needs to know exactly the plan in this position. So long castle. So black's idea is to keep the pawn on e7 and actually try maybe to get f5 at some point. Rook g8, f5, bishop g7. So queen a5, f4, rook c8, king b1. And the idea is that in case of bishop g7, white just wants to put the pawn on f5, queen c5, queen d3. This will be a transposition. So queen c5 is main move, queen d3. And yeah, this position seems to be in white's favor. After if e6, bishop e2, this is very typical situation, and it seems that white gained a couple of tempis probably, or at least a tempi compared to many other lines of this sort. At least very often black was not playing h6 actually. So the whole point of h6 is to play without e6. Therefore, bishop g7 is played usually. I mean, f5, I think here the problem is e5. So bishop g7, and now simply f5. This typical plan, h5. I mean, black doesn't have much play, so white has a very clear idea to put the queen on f3, knight on d5 at some point. So I will show you h5, queen f3. Now, well, just some small trick. In case of bishop c6, bishop b5 is actually very nice and strong, because, of course, in bishop takes b5, there is rook d5 move. Yeah, so a6, that's why black is trying to not to allow changing these bishops. And now, well, very clear, simple plan, bishop d3, bishop c6, rook e1, then you put, let's say, h4, knight to d5, b5, c3, bishop c2. Well, it's difficult to find play for black here. I mean, what to do with the king, how to proceed. I mean, bishop d5, e d5 is not, of course, is not good. Bishop on g7 maybe can potentially get to g5 somehow, even though not so easy. But even if it gets bishop c2, bishop to b3, I mean, one day, at least in a practical sense, will be very difficult with the king in the center. So it's not too bad for black, this system, but still, I think that practice shows that white has a nice plus in this position. That's why a6 is probably the best move here, with the idea of transposing to the e6 line. So long castle. Yeah, now bishop f6 is not the same story. Black simply has an extra tempi. So here this should be fine. Rook c8 or takes on d4 and rook c8. Also, what is important, that not only extra tempi, but actually the pawn on h7 is better than on h6, because, for instance, after f4, black can have some ideas with bishop h6. At some point, e5 might come, or h5, bishop h6. I mean, tempi here is quite important. It might actually help black to get his f5, for instance. I don't know, queen a5, king b1, queen c5, queen d3. Maybe already here with a pawn on a6, black can manage f5, for instance. And after e5, sometimes bishop g7 works, like e6 or something like that. Can be not too bad. So anyway, bishop f6 here is not clear. I mean, why to take on f6 before black forced you, more or less. Yeah, or at least black made some move which is not in his plan, like e6 or h6. Yeah, so bishop f6 I don't believe can be a problem. If f4, then e6 black can play, and white has nothing better than long castle anyways. So long castle and e6. Well, I just want to show you that you can get the same position, of course, and it's more usual to get this position via this move order: queen d2, a6, long castle, bishop d7. Yeah, this is another move order. So you choose if you want to play it with black, and I believe I think it's the best system in Rauzer against bishop g5. So you can choose what move order you prefer. So in any case, let's now investigate this position. So white has all kind of moves, queen e1 and so on, but nothing is really dangerous. Obviously, the most logical is whether f4 or f3. I personally prefer f3. I don't know what is better. I mean, which move is better. It's just that f3, in f3 systems, white has more control. It's, more positional, and because after f4 is maybe more dangerous tactically, and I would say more ambitious, but it also gives black more counterplay. So let's start with f4. Here there is more theory after f4, because a lot of lines which are rather direct and rather complicated. In general, this position is now becoming quite fashionable. As I mentioned, black started to play this line, and with not bad, at least, opening results. So here there are two major systems. I just show you first the h6. It's probably not great. Bishop h4. Strangely enough, it's better not to include h6 if you play this variation. So here knight takes e4 looks like a pawn, but actually queen e1. Here the knight f6, knight f5. This is a very, very forced line. Queen a5 is practically only move here. Knight d6, and okay, this position, long castle, but it's clear that white has some plus here. He has two bishops. Well, it's not too bad for black. Again, black is having some chances to make a draw here. I mean, maybe quite reasonable chances, but it's, doesn't make much sense, to play like this in the Sicilian. So you're just trying to defend slightly inferior position. Then bishop e7 here, knight f3. This is not a great version compared. You need to play this without h6, bishop h4, because now b5 is already not working well because of e5. And you will see that if you don't include h6, bishop g5, then b5, e5, b4 is okay for black. So here probably black has to play queen c7, but this is already king b1 and very unpleasant for black. Again, if rook d8, simply bishop d3, b5, g4. White is much quicker with his play. And in case of b5, now again e5 seems to be very unpleasant. So after h6, bishop h4, maybe g5 is actually a system which was rather popular at some point of time. Even Kasparov played it in the World Championship match against Nigel Short once and made a draw, but I believe the system is just not good. Fg, knight g4. White has a lot of ways to play here, but lately, computers just start to play in a very simple fashion, and I analyzed it recently while preparing this course, and it's really, actually, strangely enough, black's position is, in my opinion, pretty bad here, because white just doesn't even want to hold this pawn. So let's say bishop e7, queen d4 is very painful. It's difficult to understand what to do with black, because if knight e5, then bishop g3 comes, and otherwise black's best is rook f8, and white has a big advantage here. So better for black to play knight e5, and now queen e3, very, very accurate move, very important move. And it seems that black will just get back the g5 pawn, but his position is, much worse than it looks, because it looks like with a knight on e5 and equal pawns should be okay, but too many weaknesses, in fact. And let's say bishop e7, bishop g3, bishop takes g5, queen f2. And then, it's difficult to coordinate for black. It's difficult to find the place for the king, because long castle is also not easy. Let's say queen e7. Also, engines are trying even to play queen b6, but even if some simple move like bishop e2, then rook f1 comes, f7 pawn starts to be weak. Then h4 is a threat somewhere. I mean, lots of threats from all sides. If long castle, you have to watch out for queen a7 ideas. So actually, knight g6 probably is a better try. But then bishop g3, queen g5, and let's say queen e1. And I checked this position, tried to make few more moves just to see how it develops. And it's true that I just couldn't find anything decent for black. For instance, knight e5, bishop e2. Actually, white simply plays positionally. Bishop e7, rook f1. Now you cannot really castle long very often because on top of everything, the pawn on f7 is hanging. And also there is some maneuver which I found quite interesting. Is sometimes white is playing a3 after long castles and knight a2, knight b4, but you don't need even this. Yeah, actually, simply, well, black is very passive with his beautiful knight on e5, but no counterplay, and white is considerably better here. So long castle, and now again several interesting ideas. But let's say h4, queen a5, rook h3. I liked it. Okay, rook is just entering into the game, knight e5, and now it's very interesting. I really like how computer treats this position. Just plays very quietly. a3, just a useful move, I suppose. Rook g8, let's say bishop f4, because it looks like it's more or less okay for black, but in fact, engine gives +1 here for white. And true, when I tried to play with black this position against computer and just couldn't manage anything constructive, because bishop g7, bishop e2, then okay, h6 pawn is weak, there is no real counterplay for black, and as strange as it may look, but the position is actually much better for white. White has a serious advantage here. So this line, so h6 seems to be in trouble for black, but two other lines are not so bad. So b5 and bishop e7. b5, a very risky line, very risky, but seems that engines finding lately some resources, and even here, if you play it with black, you need really to know really a lot. So it's very dangerous, but I don't see any refutation, and now quite many strong 27 plus players are playing this variation, and nobody can find any clear way for white to get an advantage, even though from time to time black gets in trouble. But all in all, I have checked it quite carefully now before recording this lesson, and I will show you the current state of theory and my ideas what to do with white and black against in this variation. So first of all, it doesn't lose by force. It looks like it can, but it doesn't, because knight c6, bishop c6, e5 actually is not good, because takes, and black has h6 move. Very important, bishop h4, g5, and black is even better here. So another important line is bishop d3. Well, now the simplest is bishop e7, and this old forcing line e5 gives nothing. Actually, more than one way, but this is the most direct. Knight d7 takes, bishop e4. And now knight e5 is good enough. I guess it's also black has other ways to equalize slowly, but this is very direct. Queen d4, bishop takes e4. It's only move. And now probably knight e4 is more interesting, because queen e5, bishop g6 is just fine for black. Queen takes g7, check. Now you cannot play king b1 because of bishop takes e2 check, losing queen. So you have to play rook d2, and after king e7 followed by rook d8, black is at least not worse. Actually, I think computers just show some rook f1 and trying to give perpetual queen f6, queen h8 in this position. So that is not dangerous at all. Maybe white can play knight takes e4, and after f6, check in f8. White has some compensation, rook e1, rook h1, let's say h5, followed by king g8. Well, it's enough. It seems that it's perfectly enough for equality, but no more. It seems that black is also fine here. So knight c6 is not a refutation. That's why white is trying to take on f6 here, because black also wants to play b4 probably. So taking on f6, of course queen f6 is just bad now, because e5 comes, and well, it seems to be simply bad. And in case of the e5, there is knight takes b5, so that doesn't work. That's why gf6 is only move. And now, yes, this position, there are a lot of games. By the way, I think this variation was chosen by Fabiano Caruana in the last round of Candidates Tournament 2016 against Sergei Karyakin, because he needed to win, so decided to play this line. Actually, very nice game. He lost finally. Karyakin played it very well. But again, this position is, you need to be extremely precise with black, but I couldn't find any clear way for white to get an advantage. For instance, well, there are systems takes on c6. There is a queen e1 move, but it's, well, not extremely dangerous. Black has many different ways of playing. I mean, white sometimes want to get knight d5. I mean, actually the idea is to stop queen b6 because of knight d5. But black has many moves. h5, also b4, knight d5, a5 also is maybe not so completely clear. And even rook a7, some strange move, actually trying to defend against knight d5, because then you have ed, rook e7. So queen e1, I was not too impressed. Queen e3, actually maybe more interesting, this queen e3 move. So just that the queen is more active on e3. And here queen e7, very important move. Otherwise, I think white should be better. But queen e7 with the idea queen a7. And after king b1, probably b4 is the best move. Because after queen a7, queen e1 back, still not easy for black. Before you always meet with knight d5, and if long castle, then very, very important move for white, if you play this line, is a3 to stop b4, and then you continue your typical play with white. Here I don't like very much black's position, because if not a3, black always wants this before d5 ideas in this type of position. So a3 is stopping this, and I think white gets pretty good version, but before, I think this is the way to play with black, knight e2, and now queen a7. And it seems that, well, white has, as always in this line, quite a number of different ideas, like queen b3, for instance, it's possible. Queen f3, strangely enough, with the idea f5, knight g3 engine. Find it interesting, even if it doesn't look great, frankly. But all in all, I think I checked it, and it seems that black is having enough counterplay against all these moves. So knight takes c6, bishop takes c6 is probably holdable for black, even though from the white side I can recommend you to try queen e3, because not queen e7, queen a7 is not easy to I mean, for sure, impossible almost to find over the board, so you need to know it, and even if black knows it, it's still, of course, playable for white. But the main move by far is king b1. As you know already, it's very, very typical idea. Well, the main point is that in case of f5, also very typical. Otherwise, of course, why not to start with f5? But now black has this maneuver. That's why king b1 is useful. And now after king b1, bishop f4, and bishop gets to e5 here, with a normal position for black. So that's why king b1 is played. And now queen b6, definitely the best move. It's a very good square for the queen here. So knight takes c6 or knight c2. Knight takes c6 is the most dangerous and the most direct, but in the recent state of theory, it seems that black is holding here, even if the position, I mean, you really need to know, move per move this line, because again, very dangerous position. I don't recommend you to play it with black, just, well, at least after listening to this lecture you can, but in general, if black just decides to play it without deep knowledge, it can end up pretty badly. So now f5 is the most challenging move. Bishop d3 is possible, but after b4, knight e2 and h5, also very typical idea, because very often white wants to get knight g3, knight h5, so h5 is extremely useful. So now knight g3 you meet with h4, and black and then the idea is always when white plays f5, well, here there is maybe bishop h6 also move, but very often e5 is the way how black treats this position, with the idea that this knight is, well, doesn't have a good square. I mean, of course, if you get it on d5 with bishop on c4, that would be nice, but not so easy to get the knight into the game. But here bishop h6 probably is okay. So after bishop d3, before knight e2, h5, I think black is quite fine. So f5, this is a very challenging move. And now I believe b4 is very important move to play b4 here. Because otherwise, let's say if h5, fe, fe, queen e1 already now is, I believe it's quite a problem for black, because now you want to play knight d5. And somehow, in case of long castle, probably white can just do a3 even, or maybe already bishop d3. I mean, here you need to calculate quite a lot variations. For example, this knight e2, d5, and then some. I mean, it's very risky, because with such an open king to open up the center, it's always very tricky. Here, of course, e5, this type of play is already not so good, because white knight has all those squares, yeah. So so if black, if white have taken already on e6, usually e5 is not the plan before e5. But after queen e1, I think that black, is having some problems. So queen c5, another way of playing, then bishop d3, and now if you already play before knight e2, e5, now c3 is very dangerous. And then rook c1, and suddenly white starts to get, very serious play on the king side, because we shouldn't forget that black is pretty much undeveloped yet. And in case of h5, then we get to this position, fe, fe, queen e1. Probably you could get it via the h5 move order. Now, engine is showing this line as best for black. And for white, bishop g7, knight d5, king f7, knight f4, queen e5, rook f1. Actually, it doesn't show a very big advantage for white in this position, but it's very difficult to play. Yeah? I mean, engines are managing somehow to hold with this king on the center. There are always potential threats, some potential tactics for white, but of course computers, they calculate well, so they they can manage to hold this position, even though still it shows some advantage to white. But I really don't like it in a practical sense. Very difficult to play with black, because with this king, you have to watch out for all sorts of tactics, and you miss something, you just get mated. No, I don't recommend you to play this type of position. But after e5, b4, and this is the main move, so now white is not in time to take fe, so a knight e2, e5, knight g3, and here I think there was a game quite recently, Grishuk with Lipulescu, he played queen c5 and then b3, h5, h4, and white was, won quite convincingly here. Very nice game from Grishuk. But probably h5 has to be played first. So now if bishop c4, h4, knight f1 looks very dangerous, because knight just gets to e5, but queen c5 is important resource, and it's a typical situation in this line that, knight e3, bishop h6, that black badly needs to cut the knight. And here it seems that it's not clear at all. The position, I think black is pretty fine. Because on b3, I guess you can already take the pawn on e4, and if knight e3, there is bishop h6 even move. So that's why h5, h4 has to be played according to engine. And now bishop h6, practically only move. I mean, to get a decent position, because white's plan is simple. Bishop c4, b3, I mean, if let's say queen c5, b3, then bishop c4, and then queen e2, and you start to pick up pawns. And by the way, just strategical, idea for you to know that a4, I mean, there is no mate, because ab white often now takes with a bishop already on b3 quite often, and then it's difficult to create threats, and white already starts to pick up material here. So of course the position is extremely dangerous for black. I mean, if something like this happens, you can just lose a game without a fight, so you need to know a move per move. Here bishop h6 is as almost only move, and as strange as it may seem, queen e2 is interesting but not clear, because I mean, black gets king e7 and white takes the pawn on h5, but a5, some counterplay comes with a4, very unclear position. And after queen d6, rook d8 is only move. It seems that it works. White is 2 pawns up here, but rook g8, black is extremely active with all his pieces, and rook h3, for example, king e7, at least engines show equality here. I mean, very tiny plus for white, but probably it's a draw. Black wants bishop f4, and then all the pawns starts to be hanging. So it seems that this line works just by miracle, but black is holding here. And that's why maybe knight e2 is a playable move. I quite like this idea, knight e2. I've checked it. Usually black is playing h5 here, but I'm not sure it is the best move, because now white has this very nice plan, actually, h4 and then rook h3. Let's say b4, this is typical, black is trying to advance his pawns here, and rook h3. Actually, it's a very logical way of getting the rook into the game, because bishop on f1 is very good. It's protecting the pawn on g2, and otherwise, because if you try to develop this bishop, then okay, you will at least manage to play rook e1, but still rook is much more active on the third rank here. And I believe this is quite unpleasant for black. For example, rook d3 is nice move. Also c3, very interesting. Now, again, with the rook on the third rank, white can start to play even on the queen side. So here I think it's very prosperous for white. So in general, this plan, I would recommend you to pay a lot of attention with white, yeah, to play knight c2 and then h4, rook h3. But I like the way Gelfand played against Anat once. He went rook c8. It's actually a very interesting move, rook c8, I find. So black is waiting for the moment, I mean, trying to see what is white's plan. Of course, white has various ideas in this position, but yeah, the most logical is to play h4 still. But now black doesn't need h5. So for instance, he's playing rook g8 and trying to activate the rook, and this position is not so clear, even though Anand won it, but it's definitely playable with black. So I believe this variation, even if it's very dangerous, very risky, but you can play b5 here. I don't see any clear way for white, as I've mentioned already, to get an advantage. But then another line is bishop e7, which is also perfectly playable in my opinion. So now knight f3 is the main move. Well, in case of knight b3, you can put the knight on b3, the same type of position. So you choose whether, as white, whether to have knight on b3 on f3. It seems to me, by logically on f3, it looks more convincing. But so most of the players they play it with a knight on f3, not on b3. So knight f3, b5. So of course, black manages to get his setups by pure tactics, because e5 is not winning here because of b4. And that is very important. As I mentioned already, with h6, bishop h4, that wouldn't work. But here, ef, bc, queen c3, gf, very important that bishop is potentially hanging. We'll have to spend the tempi retreating this bishop. And there is quite some theory, a lot of games, but I checked it also with engine. It seems that it's dynamically balanced position, very unclear. White has his play in the center, and against, well, because black rooks are not connected, the king is on the center. From other point of view, black can also organize some play on these open lines on the queen side. So you can check this with engines, check the games, but I couldn't find an advantage here for white. So that's why by far the main move is bishop takes f6, gf6. Now let's say king b1 and queen b6. So this is the tabia. And okay, white has different plans in this position, but the most dangerous one was always f5 followed by g3, bishop h3. Actually, that was the reason why this line at some point went out of fashion, because black couldn't really find the way how to deal against it. But now lately there is a new idea for black which seems to be very interesting. So what else? Okay, let's see if white is just trying to play in a normal way. Bishop d3. I think it's very unclear. b4, knight e2, and now also h5 is interesting. Just again, yeah, as you already know. So the idea is that if knight g3, black has h4, and if f5, as you already know, e5. Even in this position, it's very unclear because knight on e2 is out of play. Yeah, I want also to mention that, of course, white cannot really play a3 before black castles, because then black will just get b4, rook b8, and a very dangerous attack. That's why it's not easy to stop before. So, and also after bishop d3 before knight e2, also possible to play a5. This was once played by Artemiev. f5, a4, knight f4, and queen c5. And it's extremely complicated position. Still engines sometimes, well, gives maybe small plus for white, but I think black is having quite a good counterplay. I mean, I wouldn't mind at all playing like this with black, and with white, I'm not sure that would be my cup of tea. The king can get under attack on b1, and black's king is pretty safe. So I believe bishop d3 is perfectly fine for black. So the main move is f5, as usual. Yeah, this typical idea. And now black castles. Now b4 is already not so good, because, for example, white has fe already, intermediate move, and knight e2. And that is what I mentioned, that here e5 already knight will get to f5, and otherwise white starts to attack the e6 pawn. So b4 is not great here after f5. So black is castling normally. And yeah, again, white has all sorts of moves, bishop d3 and so on. It has to be this position. If you want to play it, you need to study games. But all in all, black's play is rather, rather logical here. And I checked a bit all games, couldn't find any convincing plan for white. White tried many different plans, but the most convincing is g3. Just trying to get bishop h3 and to get this attack, to attack directly the e6 pawn. King b8, logical, takes on e6, takes, and bishop h3. And that was considered to be very unpleasant for black. I remember, I think there was game Leko-Timman also, because white had a very clear plan. What black would do is to play bishop c8, let's say queen e1, a nice prophylactic move, because black might get before d5. Yeah, this is also very typical idea to break through in the center. And rook e8, let's say knight e2, and then rook f1. So then knight f4, starting to put pressure on the e6 pawn, and black is very passive somehow. Yeah, so it was considered to be maybe nothing dramatic, but just very unpleasant, and white's play is very simple. So but recently, maybe just a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, engines start to show a very interesting plan. Is to play knight a5. And it's true that I couldn't find anything for white here. I mean, the idea is that in case of b3, which is logical just to limit this knight, then b4, knight e2, and knight b7. A very nice maneuver, because knight on c5 is protecting very well the e6 pawn. And actually black can start his counterplay on the c line. So he doesn't need rook on e8, because with the knight on c5, it's also, by the way, putting pressure on the e4 pawn and protecting the pawn on e6. So this maneuver have changed the assessment of this line. And after knight a5, I think black is quite okay. Actually, in practice, black even won some games with this idea. And for instance, In case of knight d4, of course, it's very critical move, attacking the pawn, but engine shows that before knight e2, e5, as ugly positionally as it looks, but takes knight f5, knight c4, followed by rook c8, and black is just in time. I mean, white can still make it equalize here, but no more than that, because black gets counterplay. Let's say if in case of knight c1, a5, and with a beautiful knight on f5, control on d5 square, positionally white is doing very well, but black simply has counterplay. So a4, then sometimes knight a3 checks. I think black is just fine here. So, of course, white has other tries, but all in all, I believe that after f4, quite not typical for Rauzer, yeah, that black has even more than one system, which is, well, perfectly playable. So that's why my choice, and I would advise you to play f3. I think here it's also more difficult for black to play, on top of the fact that it might be objectively more convincing than f4. Because white's plan is simple. King b1, then you start to push pawns. This b5 idea is not so dangerous anymore because the pawn on e4 is never hanging. So, I mean, I always thought it was very unpleasant. And by the way, that was mainly the reason why I didn't like this a6 bishop d7 system, just because of this simple play. I remember once I lost, we are a little bit different move order, but I lost against Garry Kasparov in rapid chess mines, I think 1999. And yeah, that was just very impressive how Garry slowly maneuvered, and then with my king in the center, I was a threat to castle because to get mated on the king side. And then somehow my position started to deteriorate, and I understood that this type of position are very dangerous. So what I mean, let's say b5. Yeah, if b5, then the idea is that you just, what I want to do is take on c6, king b1, bishop e7, h4, or let's say we can consider it via bishop e7 move order, king b1. Also, by the way, even bishop e3 is possible, b5, king b1 also. But I think that king b1, I don't know, I don't like this position with black. I believe white is much easier to play with white. Engines are actually not assessing it too badly for black. I believe white is a bit better, but it's playable. But again, in practical sense, I don't like. If queen c7, actually knight takes c6 is quite unpleasant, I find. And now the idea was that in case of bc, white has this maneuver bishop f4, e5, bishop g5. Now if black doesn't play bishop e6, then bishop c4 comes, very strong bishop on b3. And after bishop e6, white can just take and play f4. Because black cannot take back with bishop, the pawn on d6 is hanging. And here f4 with the threat of f5, and white is just better. I think after ef, white can also consider playing knight e2 to take with a knight on f4. So knight takes e6 is very serious also. Or also engines just play bishop e3 here. It's a bit strange just giving up the tempi, yeah? But I mean bishop g5 and then bishop e3 back, but still b5 g4 and you just start pushing pawns. But I like even more knight takes e6 here. An idea is the same, bishop c6, you just start to play h4. A lot of control on the position for white. So let's say b5, if b5, and then this plan, I want you to know it. If you want to play it with white, I think it's the best plan is you take on c6, you play h4. And then very often you play bishop d3, knight e2, for instance, on knight e2, knight d4, bishop d3, and black, it's very difficult for black to break through in the center because d5 always e5 comes. Yeah, so usually castles, black castles here, there is no immediate mate. I mean, you have to be very accurate with white also because black has, like g4, maybe already black will get some push in the center, I suspect, yeah. And in any case, with the pawn on h7, not on h6, the mate is not coming very soon. So it's more that here white is trying to play positional chess, getting control in the center. So I like knight e2 move. very typical maneuver for this type of position is moving the knight to d4. Because black cannot really play e5, knight gets to f5, cannot play d5 because e5. So like this, you get the knight on d4. Also, it doesn't really have this any more counterplay with b4, a5, pushing the knight, attacking the knight on c3. And, well, rook c8 is usually played, let's say g4, queen c7, bishop d3. Now engine's playing rook e8. In fact, according to engine, white has a only very small plus. But frankly, it doesn't look good. I would never play this position with black because I don't know what to do. I mean, white is slowly pushing, has full control. I don't see any shade of counterplay because, again, as already you know, the d5, of course, e5 comes, and if you cannot take bishop f4. So you cannot really get any counterplay. So rook f8, white can do anything he wants. Just you have to be very careful about some, at some point d5 might work, so some tactics might work because, but let's say c3 is one of the ideas which I like, followed by bishop c2. Yeah, it's again playable for black. You can analyze it, and well, you have to be very accurate to get. I mean, not to get crushed here with black, but all in all, I don't like for black. I mean, I can clearly recommend it to play with white. So that's why I always thought f3 is very simple and nice. But now knight takes d4. I'm sure it is the best move, and that is how they play now. It's important to take on d4 that white takes with a queen, because that gives black some tempest. I mean, because otherwise white can very soon play bishop e3 or take on c6 after b5. And this is a better version. Takes bishop e7. It's also not easy for black, but king b1. But it needs to be very precise. It seems like this position is just playable, but in fact, very important the move orders. Queen c7 is definitely needs to be played, because if b5, g4, already here engine starts to jump, like +1 almost. So queen c7, actually it's very tactical. So black's idea, he's preparing his b5 and so on, and he's trying to stop white from getting his pawns to g4, h4. So the idea is that in case of h4, black is playing h6. Of course, if bishop f6, black can definitely sacrifice the pawn. Bishop takes f6, and also already gf6 is not too bad, because white will need anyway to play f4, and pawn on h4 here is not great. So, but also pawn sacrifice should be perfectly fine for black. So that's why white, let's say, retreats to e3, c1, and then h5. Very important. If white manages g4, he is much better. But after h5, then you play b5, rook c8, and not so easy, because anyway, probably the best plan for white will be to come back queen d2, then to go knight e2, the same story. But without a couple of tempests, it might be already perfectly fine for black. So that is the point. G4 is a very dangerous move. Now h5, as dangerous as it looks, but it has to be played, because in case if you just follow up with b5, bishop e3, this position is just better for white. I mean, if you give white chance to push his pawns, because as I've mentioned already, black doesn't have so much counterplay. I mean, his play, he's not going to mate white, so he badly needs to stop this pawn advance, white's pawn advance. So here, for example, castle g5, knight h5, queen d2, rook ac8, and both bishop h3 is very dangerous, followed by bishop g4. And also you already know this typical important maneuver, knight e2 followed by knight g3. Again, I don't know, black doesn't have much play. White is already creating threats, so this is simply better for white. But after g4, h5, there are many actually games, mainly rapid chess, but on the top level there were games Grishuk, Firouzja, also Giri played, if I remember well, also against Firouzja, some other players. It's somehow holding, it seems to me. GH, Now, not rook h5, h4, this is better for white, so knight takes h5. Of course, it looks very strange, yeah? And I mean, the idea is that if bishop e7, you play king takes e7. That's why, well, it was, nobody played like this before engine started to show that you can do it. I mean, it's not really human to play like this, just leave your king in the center. But as amazingly enough, it seems that black is okay here. He wants queen c5 at some point, and okay, white also has some weaknesses on the with his pawn structure, and there is no mate. I mean, black king is not getting mated here. So knight takes h5. Very interesting move is rook g1. That was Grishuk played against Firouzja in rapid chess, and Firouzja made a mistake. He played the very natural move queen c5. Thought, okay, it's great. Now I can change queens because that is definitely in black's favor. But then the cold shower was queen d2. That was the preparation of Grishuk, because now it's queen g1, bishop e7 is just winning by force. So it's not playable, and otherwise, of course, queen c5 is very important, loss of tempo. So here white is better. So rook g1 is a very dangerous move, but engines take on g5, rook g5, and play long castle. And it's still not totally clear. I mean, if black can manage to equalize, because, well, the idea is that if white takes on d6, then black can just exchange queens and simply, I mean, it's like he has enough play in this endgame here, or to e8, and then king to e7. And because of these weaknesses on the, I mean, black will easily make a draw here, just two weak pawns. So queen d6 is not so challenging, but maybe an interesting move is queen b4. It has to be investigated. And after bishop c6, maybe a4. I've checked this position a bit. Black has to be careful. I mean, engines find a way how to equalize here by force, but it's a bit dangerous, because sometimes even some ideas like knight b5 can work. AB, and white can organize quite a dangerous attack. Or, for instance, if g6, there is a move rook a5, quite interesting move, and white just wants to attack somehow, you know, to create a very dangerous attack. So I think I think engines are showing knight f4, and if in case of rook takes g7, I think taking on h2, and it looks quite dubious, but okay, has to be checked, but maybe it's holdable for black. So g4 is a very serious move. Of course, again, this line, as actually practically any line in Rauzer, if you want to play, yeah, it's very important. At least first few moves, you quite often have to make the only moves to get a decent position. But then once you manage it, then things are getting better already. So after g4, h5, all this line is probably forced, practically forced, if you want to have chances to equalize. But I couldn't find an advantage here for white. So that's why maybe queen d2 for white. Now I'm more talking to players who like to play it with white. Queen d2 is an interesting way of playing. Just a game. I mean, not forcing matters. b5. Again, now if g4, h5, but let's say h4, or you could start with h4 before queen d2. It gets to this position anyway. h6, bishop e3, h5, as I already explained, very important. And now, let's say knight e2. Knight e2, and you maneuver bishop g5 first, so it more or less gets to this position, which engines assess as almost equal, little bit better for white. I personally don't like those positions with black. I mean, it's difficult to play them, even though, again, yeah, it's maybe perfectly playable, but white has easier game because his king is safe. Black can never, I mean, very rarely he can really manage to castle in this position, because we'll get bishop g5, knight f4. So engines are trying to play like this: a5, bishop g5, b4, then queen b7, and somehow, because white is also not so easy for white to create threats, so black is trying rook c8 and waiting, and maybe one day he can castle Strange play. Let's say rook c1. White, by the way, also wants, using the fact that the black skin is on the center, very often wants to open up, actually on the, strangely enough, on the queen side, trying to play c3. So queen b7, let's say knight f4. Now if a4, I think already bishop c4 can be very dangerous. Bishop is strong here. Well, it's one of the options. Let's say rook c8 and something like bishop e2. And, well, what can I say about this position? You can play it with black, you can play it, but I still prefer white in a practical sense. White has some ideas, sometimes even c4 can be played. It is in any case a complicated position, but I mean, I still believe that f3 is practically, it's definitely a better choice than f4 if you don't want to spend 1 month analyzing f4 and trying to find some refutation of black play, but it's first of all difficult to manage and I mean to find this refutation. Secondly, maybe you don't want to spend 1 month of your life refuting this line of Rauzer. So then f3 is a practical, solid and very healthy way of playing. But all in all, as you see, situation is pretty favorable for white in Rauzer. There are ideas, I mean, things are not simple for black. So bishop g5 is definitely a very, very dangerous and serious move. And from the black side, yes, I can recommend you this to analyze deeper, this maybe a6 bishop d7 system. There was also, if you remember, this a6 bishop e7 move order, which I also advised you as it's playable. So it's not easy for black, Rauzer. It never was, but it's still complicated, and there are, well, positions where you can really play for a win, and very important, especially those positions when white at some point takes on f6 gf, is to study games to understand the typical ideas of those positions, because they're very non-standard, and usually a player who understands it better, who kind of check more games and go deeper into this structure, has an advantage in the forthcoming game. So, well, that's all about d6, knight c6, and finally we are moving now to the best Sicilian for black. I strongly believe it's the most reliable. Kasparov and Fischer were playing it, so that's among others. So it's quite a good reference for this opening, which is Najdorf instead of knight c6, a6, and the next few lessons will be about the Najdorf, what to do with both colors, and what is the current state of theory, and what are the prosperous lines for each side.